Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Monday morning, talking 8 games around the NBA. Before we hop into the slate, quick reminder, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below if you like the videos that I am putting out. If you happen to stumble across these videos and you're not already following me on Twitter, my Twitter handle at BrentonHyden1 is in the description down below. Make sure you head over to the Twitter machine and you hit that follow button. While you're doing that, you can send me a direct message and find out how you can get access to my content, projections, Discord, and all that good stuff for a very affordable price. Or you can head over to my Patreon page. Address is in the description down below as well, and you can sign up for one of the monthly tiers that I have available over there. Also, as I attempted to do a couple weeks ago, I'm going to try to shorten these podcasts, try to keep them around 30 minutes, maybe just a couple minutes over. And in doing that, I'm going to skip over some of the in-depth numbers and things that I would normally look at. All that information, however, is in the notes that I provide on a daily basis on the website that you have access to. For those of you that don't know, I basically just read directly from those notes whenever I am recording this video. So if it is in the notes, it would have been in the video. If it's in the video, it's in the notes. So without further ado, let's hop into the slate. The first game of the night, we're going to talk about San Antonio at Detroit. Zaza is out. Ish Smith remains out. Henry Ellenson is out. And John Lure is probable. We have San Antonio being 3.5-point favorites in this one, a 214 over under. Derek White has been playing really well, averaging 20 points in wins. 3 of their last wins, going 24 of 29 from the floor. Blake Griffin playing pretty well, averaging 29.7 points over his last 3 games. And DeMar DeRozan, interesting to note, he is averaging 10.8 rebounds over the last 4 games. The Spurs kicking off their lengthy rodeo road trip. I have interest in a few of all the Spurs in this spot. I'm going to highlight a couple that I think are really, really strong mid-range options, and that's Derek White and Bryn Forbes. We know that Detroit really does struggle to defend opposing backcourts, especially point guards, and they lack rim protection against opposing point guards. They are giving up 25.8 points, 6.9 rebounds, and 8.8 assists. And we know Derek White, the guy that takes a decent amount of his shots at the rim this season, with 34% of his shots coming at the rim. Detroit allowing 68.3% shooting at the rim. They also really struggle to defend in the paint and mid-range, where another 38% of Derek White's shots come from. I think he's going to be a popular option. I'm fine with him in cash. I think Bryn Forbes is a very strong cash and tournament option as well. If we take a look at Bryn Forbes, just his game logs, obviously he did struggle against Memphis. That was a spot where I actually did like him. He just didn't shoot very well, but he's a guy that's going to generally get you in the mid-20s with upside. We've seen the upside games out of him a couple times lately, so I do like him a significant amount. I do like DeMar DeRozan, LaMarcus Aldridge, but I kind of like getting cheaper exposure to the San Antonio side of this game. I did note there are some things that help DeMar DeRozan in this spot, as well as LaMarcus Aldridge. And LaMarcus Aldridge coming in at 7,400 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel after playing really well of late is at least a little bit interesting in all formats. On the Detroit side of things, the Spurs have been really, really good of late, a 102.8 defensive rating over the last 10 games. We can still look at Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin, especially Andre Drummond. 8,100 on DraftKings is a little bit appealing, especially in tournaments. He does have monster upside. He's 9,300 on FanDuel. That's a little less appealing. You can even use him in cash if you want to. San Antonio's interior defense has been pretty good. They do a good job of limiting opponent rebounds and points in the paint. So it's not like it's not like it's a smash spot for Andre Drummond. But he's a guy, generally speaking, you do feel pretty comfortable he's going to have a 40-plus game. Obviously did struggle against Memphis, Milwaukee, Orlando in a couple of these outings. But that's kind of not the guy that we generally expect out of him. And we know Andre Drummond, 23.7% usage rate. Blake Griffin, 28.9% usage rate. Even Blake Griffin at 8,500 on DraftKings, 9,600 on FanDuel is a little bit interesting. I will say Reggie Jackson at 4,700 on DraftKings is really, really tough to overlook, especially in cash. But even in tournaments, and again, it's not a great matchup against San Antonio. But it is worth noting that's San Antonio does still rank 19th in defensive efficiency to point guards, and Reggie Jackson does take a lot of his shots in the paint or mid range or above the break threes, where San Antonio has struggled to defend. And it's just a really cheap price tag for Reggie Jackson, who is another guy that you feel pretty comfortable is going to get you 20 plus fantasy points most nights. Reggie Bullock is a guy that I highlighted as a very, very strong tournament value on DraftKings at 3,700, 4,700 on FanDuel. Especially if you think he's going to get minutes. He has topped 30 minutes in 6 of the last 10 games. Spurs allowing opposing small forwards to shoot 36.6% on 3-point attempts. He takes 61% of his attempts from beyond the arc. Moving on, Brooklyn at Boston. This is a very interesting game. Boston 10.5-point favorites in this one, 218.5 over under. Looking at the Brooklyn side of things first, we do know that Rondae Hollis-Jefferson is out, Karis LeVert is out, and Alan Crabb is out. On the Boston side of things, Marcus Morris is probable, Kyrie Irving is probable, Robert Williams is questionable, Aaron Baines is out, and Jabari Bird remains away from the team. DeMarre Carroll has been playing really well, second straight 20-point effort. Yesterday, D'Angelo Russell averaging 26.5 points over his last 4 games and 9.3 assists during the team's 3-game winning streak. Jaylen Brown has been playing really well, averaging 17 points on 63.5% shooting. Brooklyn's side of this game, not terribly appealing. I don't dislike taking a look at D'Angelo Russell and Spencer Dinwiddie. Obviously, I mentioned D'Angelo Russell has been playing really well, coming in at 7,300 on DraftKings, 8,200 on FanDuel. I like him in tournaments. Obviously, we know he has a really low floor. He has a floor like this Charlotte game where he played, 27 minutes, only got 28 fantasy points, but he has a lot of upside as well. And we've seen Boston struggle against some of these high usage guards. I actually think Spencer Dinwiddie is the guy that I have the most interest in, coming in at 5,800 on DraftKings, 5,900 on FanDuel. He just has a knack for thriving in some of these matchups. He's another guy, high usage guy off of the bench. He also leads the team in drives at 13.9 drives per game, and that's important to note because Boston has really struggled to defend some of these guards that drive off screens. And Boston's rim protection numbers have actually taken a big hit with Aaron Baines being out. I like Spencer Dinwiddie in cash and tournaments. I think he's going to be super low owned, and that $5,800 price tag is really, really appealing. Joe Harris is fine in cash and tournaments. I don't really have a lot of interest in him. It's just not a great spot, but he's another guy continues to have upside, continues to take a decent amount of shots, play a lot of minutes, and has a pretty good floor. DeMarre Carroll, as I mentioned, has been playing really well. He's fine in cash and tournaments. And then Jared Allen and Ed Davis, 2 names to keep an eye on. Jared Allen tends to struggle in some of these matchups with mobile bigs. Al Horford, a pretty mobile big man, but he's an interesting tournament option. 5,500 on DraftKings and 6,200 on FanDuel. Boston 24th in defensive efficiency to centers over the last 10 games, giving up 26 points, 17.2 rebounds. But Ed Davis is the guy that I think I would be getting some tournament exposure to at 3,600 on DraftKings, and he's power forward eligible at 4,200 on FanDuel. On the Boston side of things, obviously Kyrie Irving coming back makes him really, really interesting in this spot against the Brooklyn Nets. Kyrie Irving was on fire prior to missing a couple games with that eye injury. Should be back completely good to go. He averaged 46.1 points on 21.7 points to go along with 10.7 rebounds and 10.7 assists and 3.7 rebounds over his last 3 games. Brooklyn, their backcourt defense is pretty solid, but they do really struggle in the paint and mid-range. 36% of his shots come in the paint or the mid-range. Brooklyn allowing roughly 43.5% in both those areas, but they're also struggling to defend the three-point line, allowing 36.4% on above the break threes. 28% of his shots are above the break threes. Al Horford, one of my favorite mid-range slash value-ish options, especially on DraftKings at 5,600. We know Brooklyn really, really struggles against big men. We love taking centers against Brooklyn. And it's worth noting that even though Al Horford has been playing limited minutes and Kyrie Irving returning in this game, he's still a guy that has upside. He's been over 30 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 playing limited minutes. Eventually his minutes are going to increase. I don't hate taking some shots on Al Horford in the spot. Marcus Morris, Jason Tatum, Gordon Hayward, Jaylen Brown, all guys that you can take a look at. I do have some notes on Morris in the breakdown, and you're going to have to deal with the trash in the background if you can even hear it, because the garbage truck is here, and it's fitting that it comes whenever we're talking about the Memphis Grizzlies. That's the next game of the night. We're going to talk about Memphis Grizzlies at New Orleans Pelicans. New Orleans only 5-point favorites in this one, 213.5 over under. Nikola Mirotic is out. Chandler Parsons is away from the team, dealing with some contract and playing time disputes. Dylan Brooks is doubtful, and E'Twaun Moore is questionable. Memphis is in a really good spot here tonight, going up against the Pelicans. I just don't have a ton of interest in them outside of maybe some tournament sprinkles and guys like Kyle Anderson. He's been absolutely smashing lately, averaging 32 points on 32 fantasy points on 13 points, 5.2 rebounds, 4.0 assists, and 68% shooting over his last few games, including a triple-double against the Brooklyn Nets. Kyle Anderson, 5,200 on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. One of my favorite options. New Orleans ranks 29th in defensive efficiency to small forwards on the season, allowing 23 points per game on 42.6% shooting. And we did see Kyle Anderson the last time these teams faced off play really well, putting up 52 fantasy points in 32 minutes. Kyle Anderson, a very, very good option here. I don't dislike Mike Conley at his price, 7,500 on DraftKings, 8,100 on FanDuel. Marc Gasol is interesting at his price, 7K on DraftKings, 7,600 on FanDuel. Continues outside of the San Antonio game where they got completely obliterated, playing a decent amount of minutes. The shot attempts have been there for him. Rebounding has been there at times for him. It's not a great matchup, but he's perfectly fine in all formats. Justin Holiday is the guy that I have interest in as well, coming in at 3,500 on DraftKings, 4,100 on FanDuel. I could realistically see him getting 24 to 26 minutes in the spot. I have him projected at 26 minutes, but if he's playing really well, maybe those minutes increase without Dylan Brooks there. That could definitely help his minutes in this spot. Dylan Brooks did play in that San Antonio game, so you could see Justin Holiday getting a few extra minutes. He played 21 in that spot, so if Dylan Brooks misses, Justin Holiday would be a guy that I could see even getting closer to 30 minutes, and in a good matchup, Justin Holiday at 3,500 is too cheap to overlook. On the New Orleans side of things, not a great matchup for anyone from this game. Obviously, Anthony Davis is Anthony Davis. You don't have to be afraid of playing him in any matchup. He is matchup proof. He's been playing really well recently. Obviously, only 29 minutes against Cleveland. Still put up 50 fantasy points. He's perfectly fine in cash and tournaments. I do like Julius Randle in cash and tournaments as well as a cheaper way to get exposure to this game. He's been playing really well lately, and in this matchup did really smash last time these teams played. 51 fantasy points in that matchup. He's a cheaper way to get exposure. You can also take a look at Drew Holiday and E'Twaun Moore, Darius Miller, other guys to take a look at. The three-point shooters are where I do kind of have interest because Memphis has really struggled to defend the three-point line of late. And if E'Twaun Moore misses, Darius Miller at 3,600 on DraftKings. And let's see, what is his FanDuel price? 4,200 on FanDuel would be appealing. You can look at Elfrid Payton and GPPs as well, and it's worth noting, keep an eye on the news. Tim Frazier is a candidate to be waived with his contract becoming fully guaranteed at 4 p.m. today, so that's something we should keep an eye on. Moving on, Denver at New Orleans, Denver at Houston, sorry. Houston 1-point favorite in this one, 215 over under. We know Eric Gordon and Chris Paul and Will Barton are all out for this game. Harden, 10 consecutive games with at least 35 points and 5 assists. Leads the NBA scoring 33.7 points. Has scored at least 30 points and 12 consecutive contests. And Clint Capella, 21 rebounds in each of the last 2 games. The Denver side of this is a little convoluted whenever we have them being fully healthy now, with exception to Will Barton. Gary Harris and Paul Millsap are continuing to work their way back from injuries. Millsap is actually playing through that broken toe. His toe is still broken, but that has not stopped him of late from being pretty darn effective. Struggled against Sacramento. But against the Knicks and against Charlotte, had really, really good game. I like Paul Millsap in this spot, 5,400 on DraftKings. He's a little more expensive on FanDuel at 6,500, but you do expect his minutes to continue to increase. If he sees right around that 30-minute mark in a pretty good matchup against Houston, he's a guy that I would be willing to get a lot of exposure to. He's taking 42% of the shots at the rim. Houston allowing 67.7% shooting at the rim this season. I like Paul Millsap. Houston also struggling to defend the three-point line, allowing 40.6% 3-point shooting, and 20% of his shots are three-pointers. Obviously, Nikola Jokic has been stellar of late, 22 points, 9.2 assists, 10 rebounds, 57% shooting over his last 6 games. Again, Houston really struggling to defend the rim at 10K. Nikola Jokic is appealing on DraftKings, 10-4 on FanDuel. I like him in this spot. There's another center that we're going to talk about later that I like a little bit more, so I probably won't have Nikola Jokic, but he's still a very, very strong option. You can look at Plumlee, still playing backup 4 and backup 5 minutes. But his minutes you do expect to be down in the 20 to 22 range, which does hurt his upside a little bit. Outside of those guys, Jamal Murray is fine in tournaments. Jamal Murray coming off a down game against Charlotte, had a huge game against Sacramento. He's just very inconsistent, but in this spot, he's a perfectly fine tournament option. I do have interest in Gary Harris a little bit at 5K on DraftKings, not on FanDuel at 6,200, also where he is small forward eligible. But this is a spot. The minutes have been pretty good for him over the past 3 games since returning from that injury. Field goal attempts are nice to see. The rebounding assist numbers are nice to see. I think I like Gary Harris a lot in tournaments, and I'm not going to go with anyone else in this spot from Denver. You're mostly looking at Jokic, Harris, Murray in tournaments, and Paul Millsap. On the Houston side of things, it starts with the backcourt for the most part. Austin Rivers and James Harden. Obviously, James Harden. I don't really need to go too in depth. The dude has like a 4 million percent usage rate, and averages like 1 billion fantasy points per minute whenever you take Chris Paul and Eric Gordon off the floor. James Harden at 12K on DraftKings. He is also above that mark over on FanDuel at 12.9. It's a smash spot. Every spot is a smash spot for James Harden. Did struggle a little bit against Portland, but I'm not too terribly worried about that. Denver is top 5 in defensive efficiency against point guards and shooting guards. That's a little concerning, but whenever you look at Austin Rivers and the fact that he's played over 40 minutes in 3 straight games, he's played a ton of minutes since even joining the Rockets. He's going to continue to play a ton of minutes, especially if someone like Michael Carter-Williams gets waived. That takes one more bench player. I mean, Carter-Williams hasn't even been playing recently, but again, that's just one more bench player that's not on the team. It's a spot where you just lock in minutes for Austin Rivers, coming in at 4,700 on DraftKings, 4,500 on FanDuel. More of a cash guy just because of the minutes, but they're still really appealing. Clint Capella has been outstanding recently, averaging 16.2 rebounds, 18.2 points per game over the last 5. Continues to play a lot of minutes. It's a tough matchup, but the rebounding upside is there for him, and if the minutes are going to be there for him at 7,500 on DraftKings, 9K on FanDuel, he's still really appealing in this spot. Again, 21 rebounds in back-to-back games. I don't hate taking a look at PJ Tucker, Daniel House, Gerald Green as values as well. I would probably lean towards House and Tucker over Gerald Green, but Gerald Green at 3,900 on DraftKings, 3,800 on FanDuel can be used as a drop score candidate. Moving on, Utah at Milwaukee. Milwaukee 5.5 point favorites in this one, 221.5 over under. Grayson Allen, Thabo Sefolosha, Dante Exum are out. DJ Wilson is doubtful for this game. It was nice to see Donovan Mitchell play really well last time out against Detroit. Was getting heckled by a fan and decided to take out his anger on that fan by just completely destroying the Pistons. He's 7,400 on DraftKings, and this is a spot where I have a lot of interest in a just too cheap, I think, Donovan Mitchell. He is, let me pull up Utah in the projections here. He is 7,700 on FanDuel. high usage guy. Continues to take a lot of shots for this team. Bucks ranked 10th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards on the season. They've given up the 5th most fantasy points per game to the position, however, and they give up a high percentage of shots and high percentage success rate in the paint and the mid range. Again, guys that take a lot of shots in the paint and mid range, we love targeting Milwaukee with them. Donovan Mitchell, 40% of his shots come in the paint or the mid range. I have a ton of interest in him tonight. He is a guy that I will be definitely considering building my lineups around. I do really like Jay Crowder and Derek Favors in the spot. Milwaukee has really struggled against power forwards as well. Both of those guys consistent for the majority of the season. Jay Crowder at 4,300 is really interesting. Coming off a down game against Detroit, still had the rebounding and assists, some steals. He is kind of the defensive specialist. You could see him getting a couple extra minutes to try to defend Giannis. And some of the length that Milwaukee has. I really like Jay Crowder in the spot. Just too cheap, I think, at 4,300 on DraftKings, 4,400 on FanDuel. 16% of his shots are corner threes. Milwaukee allowing 46% or 40.6% on corner threes. I wouldn't be shocked to see Derek Favors maybe get a couple extra minutes. This does kind of feel like a spot where Gobert could struggle, but Rudy Gobert at 7,200 is interesting in tournaments. Same with Rubio and Joe Ingles. Joe Ingles at 4,900 on DraftKings, a very, very strong tournament option. On the Milwaukee side of things, obviously we do like to target Giannis in some of these matchups where teams do struggle to defend the rim. Utah is not one of those teams, but his usage rates and rebounding percentage does make him a strong tournament option. Utah also one of the top defenses in the NBA over the last 15 games. They ranked second with a 101.3 defensive rating. Malcolm Brogdon, a guy I'm going to continue to bang the drum for. Malcolm Brogdon, 5,200 on DraftKings is just too cheap. I know he's a guy that doesn't always have a ton of upside, but he's just so consistent. 5,900 on FanDuel. Even when he's playing limited minutes, he's getting in the mid-20s most nights. He does have like one game over his last 10 where he didn't top 20 fantasy points. I can't fade him in these spots where you just know he's going to get you in the mid-20s, and he's just too cheap, and he's always going to be overlooked. So Malcolm Brogdon, a very strong cash game option, even so when I do have tournament interest in. Chris Middleton has been shooting a little bit better of late, averaging 36.8 fantasy points on 64.2% shooting and 52.2% three-point shooting over the last 5 games. Utah, they're allowing 38.3% on above the break threes this season. That makes Chris Middleton a very, very strong tournament option. You can look at Brook Lopez and Eric Bledsoe if you wish. Not really a spot where I want to attack tonight. Moving on, Dallas. Lakers at Dallas. Dallas 7.5-point favorites in this game. Several injuries or one injury mostly that plays a pretty big role in this game. 221.5 over under. LeBron and Rondo are out. Kyle Kuzma is questionable. I would not be shocked to see Kyle Kuzma suit up. He was warming up prior to yesterday's game and did look pretty good from the videos that I saw. So wouldn't shock me if they just sat him out in that game because they had a back-to-back. But his status is really, really important. If he plays, I have a lot of interest in him. Dallas is tough on opposing power forwards, but 30.2% usage rate, 1.15 fantasy points per minute whenever you have Rondo and LeBron off the floor. He's a pretty strong option at 7,600 on DraftKings, 7,100 on FanDuel, a guy that you can definitely consider building around if we get word that he's going to play. If he sits, Lance Stevenson, Michael Beasley, both guys in value territory in the spot. We saw Beasley actually get 20 minutes yesterday, so that was good to see. He was away from the team for quite a long time, so they are easing him back. But both Lance Stevenson and Michael Beasley would be value guys to consider. Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball had to be considered at least because of the minutes they're going to play, especially Brandon Ingram, even if Kyle Kuzma plays. And Brandon Ingram, he does have a higher usage rate, but averages roughly the same fantasy production whenever you have Kyle Kuzma off the floor. But Brandon Ingram coming in at 7,800 on DraftKings, 6,900 on FanDuel is interesting regardless of Kyle Kuzma's status, because Dallas really struggling to defend the rim. Opponents are shooting 65.7% of the rim. 41% of his shots come at the rim. You can look at JaVale McGee and GPPs. JaVale McGee has been playing a decent amount of minutes of late. He's 5,500 on DraftKings, 6,500 on FanDuel. Did not play very much against Minnesota. He did struggle in that game. It was a blowout. 30-plus fantasy points in the 2 games before that. Has played pretty well against Dallas so far this season. I think it's a revenge game for him there. But Josh Hart, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, guys to consider as well, especially if Kyle Kuzma is out. KCP at 5,700 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Does project for about 30 minutes tonight regardless, but would see a couple extra, and had been playing really well whenever before the Minnesota game where he saw fewer minutes because that game was a blowout. On the Dallas side of things, Luka Doncic has kind of struggled in this matchup this season, but he's topped 30 fantasy points in each of his last 10 games, has been just crushing the league. He's topping 30 fantasy points and playing like less than 30 minutes in a lot of these games. He's just been really, really good of late, really consistent. I have a lot of interest in Luka Doncic coming in at 7,700 on DraftKings. He's really fairly priced over on FanDuel at 7,700 as well. One of my favorite ways to get exposure to this game. But the guy that I have the most interest in, Harrison Barnes. He's pretty close to a lock in this spot, coming in at 5,100 on DraftKings, 5,600 on FanDuel. It's just too cheap. Like, he's coming off a down game against Philly. But he's going to play over 30 minutes, assuming this game stays close. He's going to take double-digit shots, has his hand in a lot of the offense, can get you some assists, blocks, steals, rebounds. Dallas just really bad against opposing front courts. 22nd defensive efficiency to opposing front courts over the last 10 games. I can't fade him in this spot. He's going to be a core play for me. 5,100 is just way too cheap. He's been over 35. He's averaged 35 fantasy points in this matchup this season. The same goes with Wesley Matthews, 4,400 on DraftKings, 5K on FanDuel. Gonna play 30-plus minutes if this game stays close. Gonna take a lot of shots. Lakers really bad against opposing shooting guards. 29th in defensive efficiency. They've allowed them to shoot 36.3% on three-pointers. Wesley Matthews has been pretty solid against the Lakers in 2 games already this season, and we like that he's at home because he shoots better at home. This has been a thing that has gone on for a while now, but just his 3-point percentage, 43.5% at home, 36.3% on the road. This has been a trend for him since he's been in Dallas, so it's kind of weird. But DeAndre Jordan has struggled in this matchup, but he's just way too cheap, especially on DraftKings at 6,100 to completely overlook. I like him as a tournament option. We love centers against the Lakers. Dennis Smith Jr., JJ Barea, tournament options here. Dennis Smith Jr. had a short leash last time, but he's still really cheap. 4,500 on DraftKings, 5,100 on FanDuel. Moving on, Orlando at Sacramento. We are rounding the bend here. Sacramento 5-point favorites in this one, 224 over under. Iman Shumpert is out. Marvin Bagley is questionable for this game. Aaron Gordon has struggled from 3-point range of late, 5-21 over his last 3 games. Evan Fournier has shot the ball really well over his last 5 games, 52.8%, and 9 of 20 from the floor or from beyond the arc. Buddy Hield averaging 27.3 points over his last 4 games, going 22 of 41 from the arc, from beyond the arc in that stretch. I have a lot of interest in this game. It's going to be a pretty good game to target. Nikola Vucevic, monster game, 16 points, 24 rebounds, 8 assists against the Clippers. Sacramento, one of the worst teams in the NBA against opposing centers. Vucevic, 27% usage rate on the season. Vucevic, 9,500 on DraftKings, 9,700 on FanDuel, a guy that I'm going to be building my lineups around tonight. I really like DJ Augustin as a cash value. I'm going to continue to bang the drum on DJ Augustin as well. 4,600 on DraftKings, 5K on FanDuel, just as a good cash game option every single night. Most nights going to get you 20-plus fantasy points. Has the upside to do a little bit more. And in a matchup against a Sacramento team that struggles against opposing point guards, I really, really, really like DJ Augustin. Terrence Ross and Evan Fournier, both excellent options to consider in all formats. We know that Sacramento 30th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. This is a really good spot. I mentioned Evan Fournier been shooting the ball really well recently. 5,700 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Did struggle last time these teams played, but continues again to shoot the ball really well, and a little too cheap. He is second on the team in usage behind Nikola Vucevic, Terrence Ross, 4K on DraftKings, 4,600 on FanDuel. Another really strong cash game option in this spot tonight. Aaron Gordon, Mo Bamba, a couple of a couple of tournament names to keep an eye on. Orlando basically league average defense against shooting guards, but they are allowing them to connect on 38% of their 3-point attempts, and that has me interested in Buddy Hield. Buddy Hield coming in at 7,100 on DraftKings and 7,800 on FanDuel. Again, has been on fire lately. Takes 44% of his shots from beyond the arc. Yeah, it's a really good spot for Buddy Hield. Buddy's going to get some buckets tonight. Bogdan Bogdanovic, great cash option. Going to enter the starting lineup. He's 5,300 on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. Without Iman Shumpert being in the lineup, he's a guy I really like. Here tonight, high upside guy, high usage guy, or a little bit of a higher usage guy in that starting lineup. It actually does hurt De'Aaron Fox a little bit with Bogdanovic in the starting lineup. So De'Aaron Fox, just a tournament option for me here. If Marvin Bagley sits, we can go back to Nemanja Bjelica. Justin Jackson, very strong value option to consider on DraftKings. 3,800 would be someone that could get a few extra minutes with if Bagley sits. He's already projecting for about 22 minutes in the spot tonight. Moving on, New York at Portland. Portland 11.5 point favorites, 220.5 over under. Mitchell Robinson and Frank Ntilikina both going to be out for this game. The banged up Knicks, hopefully they can keep this game close. Regardless of whether or not they do, I kind of like Kevin Knox in this spot. Kevin Knox is going to play a ton of minutes regardless of the status. If they're down by 20, if they're up by 20, if they're down by 400, he's still going to play a lot of minutes. Going to take a decent amount of shots, probably going to have a really good game in the first half and then do nothing in the second half. That being said, Portland 26th in defensive efficiency to small forwards on the season. They're allowing them to shoot 40.6% from three. Knox, not a guy that takes a lot of three-pointers, but 37% of his shots are three-pointers. I really like Kevin Knox. He's 5,800 on DraftKings, 5,900 on FanDuel. Nice to see his price down below 6K once again. I have a lot of interest in him. I have a decent amount of interest in Noah Vonleh. It is a revenge game for Noah Vonleh. But he's been playing really well outside of the game against the Lakers where he did get in foul trouble. He's just been really productive. Double-digit rebounds, 8 of the last 10 games. Portland ranks 26th in defensive efficiency to power forwards, allowing 22.7 points and 11.3 rebounds. Noah Vonleh, 6,300 on DraftKings, 6,100 on FanDuel. You guys might remember he did put up 45 fantasy points against the Trailblazers last time out, and that one, again, is a revenge game. Luke Kornet continues to start at center. You can use him in GPPs. You can use Enes Kanter in GPPs, who has been really strong off the bench. Tim Hardaway, a GPP only option here for me, but he's still a high usage guy, taking a ton of shots. Some three-pointers. Portland does struggle against three-point shooters, so I do kind of like him in tournaments. He's 6,500 on DraftKings, 6,300 on FanDuel. Trey Burke is the guy I have my eye on. He's probably going to get a lot of backup point guard minutes in this spot with Frank Ntilikina being out. Trey Burke has been playing pretty well over the past couple games. He's 3,200 on DraftKings. He's 4K on FanDuel. If he's going to get in the upper teens, maybe 20 minutes, I could see him having a pretty solid game here. So I would maybe have some tournament exposure to Trey Burke here. Damian Dotson, a guy you can use on FanDuel. On the Portland side of things, obviously Jusuf Nurkic. It is definitely a smash spot for Jusuf Nurkic. I do not subscribe to the theory that Luke Kornet is going to hurt the upside of these big men because he's going to pull them away from the basket. I think that's a BS narrative. But Yusuf Nurkic, 49.5 points on 22 points and 12.45 rebounds over his last six games. Knicks giving up the 5th most fantasy points per game and ranked 24th in defensive efficiency. Yusuf Nurkic, 8K on DraftKings, 9,500 on FanDuel, just way too cheap for his upside. He continues to be heavily involved in the offense, continues to just absolutely smash. So I have a lot of interest in Yusuf Nurkic. Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, both excellent options here. McCollum always just tournament option. Damian Lillard, fine in cash in tournaments. New York allowing opponents to shoot 65% at the rim. Damian Lillard takes a 35% of his shots at the rim. Al-Farouq Aminu is a very, very strong tournament or cash and tournament value in this spot. Continues to play really well, does have upside. Knicks do struggle against power forwards. He continues to pull down a decent amount of rebounds. It's a good spot for him. Knicks also really struggling against small forwards, and Mo Harkless, after missing last game, should be back in the lineup. He has been really, really good over the last few games, playing really well. He's a pretty decent value in this spot as well. I have some interest in Mo Harkless. But that's going to do it. That's the entire slate again. You can check my notes for the rest of the stats and in-depth breakdown and other plays that I may have not talked about on the podcast. Good luck in all your contests tonight. I will be back tomorrow for a rare Tuesday recording.